Chapter 16. The Big Waves. After a whole week of morning swims, occasional tears, and expressions of frustration, Amy finally learned to swim with her face in the water. It had been a tough week for those in the kitchen and half the population who looked forward to fried fish for breakfast and scrambled eggs. Nancy and Milan simply didn't have time to do anything extra, and no one else had volunteered on a regular basis. Zahir had tried to fry his fillets one morning and burnt them all. Amy hadn't helped with the lunch cleanup either, as Damien insisted that she do her surfboard practice in the shallow water. Apologizing profusely to her friends, she tried to make up for her morning absence by arriving earlier in the afternoon to help with dinner. Often her hair was still dripping wet. Finally one morning, Amy swam all the way to the pier without stopping. It was a huge accomplishment, and she felt very pleased with herself. Helping her out of the water, Damien didn't let go of her hand. The copper-haired girl looked up with a smile. "You did so well," Damien exclaimed with pride. "Now you're ready for the big waves." "Really?" she said nervously. But she was pleased that he seemed so happy with her. She wanted to make him proud. "We should go surfing right after school before we eat lunch," she said matter-of-factly, like it wasn't anything unusual that they were walking together with this special new connection. "I don't want you to get cramps like I did one day. I'll grab our lunch when it's ready and save it for when we're done." "Okay," she smiled. They had reached the edge of the forest, near the path that Amy took to get home and change out of her wet clothes. Her heart was beating fast, and she didn't want to part company. "I think I really love him the best," she thought dreamily. "I should tell everyone that I love him, and then he will be mine." Damien looked at her and laughed. "I guess you need me to let go," he said. Blushing, Amy looked up. She didn't know what to say. Damien released her hand and said, "See you at school." It was no effort to run up the hill. Amy felt like she could run forever. Beautiful music was stirring in her heart. She thought about standing at the top of the hill and singing to everyone that she loved Damien. Bursting into the front door, she encountered Georgia and Lily brushing their hair. They were already dressed. "Swimming again," Georgia teased. "But you don't love any guys, even though you spend all your time with Damien. Oh no, he's just a friend." Amy stopped still. The music began to fade. Santa was coming down the stairs and had seen her friend's happy face. Clapping her hands together merrily, she asked, "Do you have something to tell us, Amy?" "Yes," Amy smiled, taking a deep breath. "I'm claiming Damien," she declared. All her friends celebrated, and Amy was thrilled. Damien was hers. "I'll tell the others," Santa offered cheerfully. Singing to herself, Amy whirled up the stairs. Changing into a dry, ribbon-trimmed t-shirt and another pair of Dia's specially crafted sequined shorts, she made herself ready to head straight to surfing after school. Since she hadn't helped in the kitchen all week, Amy picked up a pretty rock from the trade she had received, so she would have something to give for lunch. She heard the others heading out, talking about the new claim. Running down the worn path through the forest, Amy heard an angry argument. Assuming that it was likely between Odin and Ponzi, or Lima and Franz, she was shocked when she came through the trees to see Zahir and Damien speaking harshly to each other. Right in front of the schoolhouse, Zahir lunged forward and punched Damien straight in the jaw. Thoroughly astonished, the copper-haired girl stared. She had witnessed a number of incidents between the two lately, but this was the first time her musical friend had been the aggressor. Damien was about to hit back when Uncle Louis intervened once again. Standing between them, he held them apart. "Boys, cut this out," he shouted. "Zahir, you know this is not the right way to handle this. I'm really surprised at your behavior. Go sit down." Having shocked himself, Zahir quickly took a seat beside Georgia, shamefully dropping his dark curly head in his arms. Fredo climbed up beside him, licking his master's ear and arm anxiously until Zahir put his arm around him. As Amy joined the others on the schoolhouse steps, she noticed that everyone was looking at the swarthy young man with the golden dog. Even Georgia seemed baffled. "Little Louis punched me," Damien called out resentfully as he chose the top stair furthest away from the teacher. "He hit me hard. I didn't do anything." Unsure what to think, Amy wandered over to sit beside Damien while Uncle Louis lay out the consequences. "Zahir," he said firmly, "you need to apologize to Damien and seek a way to make amends. I want you to come and talk to me today, right after school is over." Standing up on the steps, Zahir glanced over at Damien, carefully avoiding all the other eyes that were fixed on him. Amy had never seen his dark olive face so red or his blue eyes flash so angrily. "I'm sorry," Zahir said with indignant sincerity. "I should not have hit you, regardless of what you said." "That's okay," Damien replied graciously, toying with his gold heart medallion. "I won't hold it against you, my friend." Zahir quickly slumped back down, lifted Freddo onto his lap, and hid his deep embarrassment in his dog's furry neck. Georgia leaned over and asked him something, but Zahir just shook his head. Perplexed, Amy whispered to the young surfer beside her, "What did you say to him?" Quietly, and with a very sober look on his face, Damien replied, "I just told little Louis that he had a big nose, that's all." "Zahir has a nice nose," Amy protested softly. She frowned. "I can't believe he hit you just for saying that." Thinking it through, she whispered, "Maybe you should stop calling him names." "It's the third time he's hit me," Damien mumbled, gently patting the red mark on his chin that was beginning to swell. Looking very serious, Damien whispered, "You don't know him like I do. Everyone thinks Zahir is so perfect, but he can be nasty. He doesn't like me." Looking from one to the other, Amy was confused. She had never known Zahir to dislike anyone or be nasty. It all sounded strange. But then again, she had actually witnessed Zahir hit Damien hard, and lately he had been so distant, almost unfriendly to her. She began to wonder if maybe she didn't know the real Zahir. The gold heart medallion hanging from Damien's neck caught her eye. He was the only Tiny to have received this special medallion. He had been singled out by Evan as the one who was the most caring. Amy wasn't sure who was right or who was wrong. Once everyone had settled down and was paying attention, Uncle Louis opened the book to a new page. In order to prepare them for first aid, he had been giving them lessons on their internal organs. Today, he was telling them about the way in which their circulatory system functioned. One of the library books had a very detailed picture of what was inside the human body underneath the skin, and Uncle Louis was talking about lungs that breathe and a heart that circulates the blood. Scientific matters fascinated Amy. She was eager to know how things worked, especially inside her own body. But today she was sitting with Damien, and his mind was elsewhere. While Uncle Louis showed them the various chambers of the heart and talked about veins that circulated the oxygenated blood, Damien picked up a leaf and a twig. The twig began riding the leaf, while his hand made the motions of a wave. "So when the wave starts to move you," he whispered, "that's when you push up with your arms and get your feet in position." He moved the twig into a standing position on the leaf with a slight lean forward. Amy tried not to laugh. She pushed his little twig man away. "You can show me this when school's over," she whispered back. "I want to hear Uncle Louis." Damien patted his little twig affectionately with a hurt look on his face. "Uncle Louis is more important than Twigman," he whispered sadly. Reaching over, Amy patted the twig. "I'm sorry," she apologized quietly, totally missing Uncle Louis's explanation about the way the blood flow changed when a person stood up or bent over. Even though she had just claimed the handsome blonde surfer and enjoyed being close to him, she told herself that she would sit in her usual place the next day. Charlie, Kenzie, Zahir, and Vahid were sitting in the front rows with Santa, Vanitha, Georgia, Tina, and Yuyan. All of them were deeply interested in the daily lessons, even if Zahir still had his head down and was stroking his dog. She told herself she needed to be near her studious friends if she wanted to learn. Twigman suddenly tapped her hand. Amy looked up in surprise. "He's saying that he forgives you," Damien told her with a very serious expression. It was a funny concept to Amy, and she laughed out loud. Everyone turned around to see what was happening, and Uncle Louis looked up at her with dismay. Pleasing Uncle Louis was of utmost importance to Amy, and she was distressed to see the look of disappointment in his eyes. After that, she did her best to listen. When school was over for the day, Damien suggested he would run and get lunch for both of them, so they would have something to eat when the lesson was over. "Thank you," Amy said, handing him the pretty rock she had brought with her that morning. When she helped with meals, she could eat for free, but lately she had only been helping with dinner. "What is this for?" Damien asked. "It's my trade," she replied, surprised that he had asked. "My donation for lunch." She looked at him curiously. "What are you giving?" Holding up her pink quartz rock proudly in front of him with a big grin on his face, he replied, "This." Amy laughed. "And what else, silly? Don't you have a donation?" "Nah," Damien shrugged. "I've used up all my food tickets this week. I have to make some more. I'll promise Nancy that I'll carry out the compost after dinner tonight. She'll give me lunch." Kenzie and Vanitha were on their way to the store, but the dusky girl stopped to talk. "I watched the surfing lesson yesterday," she said shyly to Damien, "and I've decided I'd like to use one of my coupons. When is a good time to come?" With a frown, Kenzie walked on alone. "Today," Damien told her quickly. "I'm taking Amy out to the big waves right now, but when we're done, I could do a shallow water lesson with you." "Okay," Vanitha smiled, her dark, pretty eyes full of eager anticipation. "See you then." As Vanitha headed off to the store to get lunch, Damien joined her, holding onto the rock. Looking around, Amy saw that she was the only one still sitting on the steps. Zahir was having a private chat with Uncle Louie over on the beach, while Georgia and Yu Yan stood a slight distance away, waiting for him to finish. Wondering what she had missed in the lesson, Amy walked over to the book on the stand and began reading. After a few minutes, she looked up to see Uncle Louie give Zahir a hug. She imagined he was consoling Zahir over the name-calling and insults, and maybe encouraging him not to take things so personally. Ponce came running over to say that Odin was sick in the outhouse and had made a big mess. "Again?" Uncle Louie said, rolling his eyes. "When will that boy learn to wash his hands?" Giving Zahir a pat on the back, he hurried off with Ponce to clean things up. Amy was still reading when Zahir, Georgia, and Yu Yan walked past her to get to the store. "Are you coming for lunch?" Yu Yan asked politely. "No, I'm going surfing first," Amy replied excitedly. "I'm going out to the big waves." Zahir looked over quickly with surprise. "You should try it," Amy encouraged, happy to meet Zahir's gaze once again. "It's actually a lot of fun." "Not interested," Zahir said flatly, turning away. "Zahir can't swim," Georgia replied defensively. "I can't either," she added. "We'd drown." "Oh," Amy said, rather deflated. She didn't understand the news Zahir with a dull look in his eyes. He had always been such a cheery friend, and now he was hurting people. What is wrong, she wondered, watching him walk off with the girls. Or did I never know this side of him? Mystified, she wondered if she should ask Zahir if he was okay. She promised herself that as soon as she found a quiet opportunity to talk to him alone, she would take it. It wasn't long before Damien was back. "Let's go," he smiled. "I'll put our lunch buns in my hammock. We can get them when we come back." Nervous and excited, Amy followed him down to the beach. The waves had just begun to come in and were washing up on the shore. Grabbing his surfboard with one arm, Damien took her hand with the other. "Let's get in," he called out eagerly. Laughing, Amy allowed herself to be pulled into the cool water. Just to build her confidence, Damien encouraged his accomplished student to try out a few small waves first. Amy easily found her balance twice in a row. "You are ready," Damien praised. "This will be so fun. We'll do it together." Attaching his board to his ankle, Damien turned it sideways and helped Amy get on. "Hold tight," he told her. "Let's swim out." Swimming out wasn't so difficult lying on a board. Damien was right beside her, pulling the board along as he swam. It was thrilling to bob up and down in the choppy water, riding over the waves until they got far enough out. "I haven't tried two on a board before," Damien admitted. "But I think it'll work. Get ready for the wave and stand up as soon as you can, and then I'll get on behind you." It was the first time Damien hadn't sounded absolutely sure about what they were doing. Amy got onto the board as she had practiced, near shore, and Damien held on behind her. The wave looked incredibly enormous as it roared toward them. Damien pointed the board into its path. In an instant, Amy felt the lift and thrill of being propelled forward with so much power. She began rising up, and then the board lurched to one side as Damien tried to join her. Amy was thrown off. The churning water pushed her down, tumbling her over and over. In a panic, she wondered which way was up. Opening her eyes, she looked for the light and struggled to rise to the surface, but it seemed so far away. "I need to breathe," Amy thought, frantic to reach the surface. In her desperation, she opened her mouth to call for help, and water rushed in. She couldn't get it out. Amy couldn't see Damien under the water, and she felt terribly alone. She panicked. "Is this the end of my life?" she wondered, terrified. As she thrashed through the rushing water, feeling like she couldn't wait another second to breathe, she remembered Uncle Louie's words after Rosa had died about being so careful with life, that sometimes you didn't get another chance. Was this the end? Suddenly, a strong hand seized her arm. She was being dragged up to the surface. Damien had found her. Her face broke through into the air, and she could finally expel all the water inside. Damien pulled her onto the board and thumped her back, and more water came out. Her lungs burned painfully. She coughed and vomited and coughed and sneezed and gasped for air. It took a few minutes before her breathing became normal again. All the while, the waves thundered around them, and Damien tried to keep his passenger from being knocked back in. Exhausted, Amy lay helplessly on the board. Between waves, Damien finally spoke. "Amy, are you okay?" "I thought I was going to drown," she wailed, suddenly starting to cry and tremble. "If you hadn't pulled me up." "I know. I couldn't find you at first," he apologized, swimming beside her with one hand on her back. "Amy, I'm really sorry. I should have just let you try to surf on your own." "Can we go in?" she sobbed. "You don't want to give it another try?" he asked, dodging a big wave. "Why don't you just rest a little longer and try surfing alone?" The close brush with death had been horrifying, and Amy could hardly think straight. She had no desire to risk another near-drowning episode. "I don't ever want to try again," she sobbed. "But you don't want to end your lessons with a scare," he argued. "Just try once more. I'm sure it will go a lot better. I wrecked it for you. You'll do fine on your own." Too weak, shaking badly, and very emotional, Amy desperately wanted to reach shore. "Please take me in," she begged. Damien finally acquiesced and began pulling the board. Vinitha, Tina, and Yuyan sat in the sand talking to one another and watching absent-mindedly, completely unaware that Amy had almost lost her life. Vinitha was waiting for a lesson. "When I take you in," Damien pleaded, "please don't tell anyone that you nearly drowned, or no one will ever want to do another surfing lesson with me." "I won't tell," Amy sobbed. "I just want to get out of the water." "Then you need to calm down," Damien encouraged as he slowly pulled her closer to shore. "Come on, Amy. You're okay. You didn't drown. I saved you." Light reflected off his gold heart medallion and flashed into her eyes. At that moment, Amy didn't feel that Damien understood her feelings, but she was thankful he had saved her. He hadn't left her to drown. She wanted to please him, and so she tried to stop crying. "That's it," he praised as her sobs subsided. "I nearly drowned when Paradise flooded," he recalled. "It is scary, but you just have to learn from it and keep going." They were very close to shore now. "How about you just try a few more easy surfs in the shallow water," he suggested, "like you did before. You enjoyed those." Amy tried to push up on the board, but her knees felt like mush. "Damien, I can't," she sobbed, falling back down. "I'm sorry." Okay, he agreed impatiently. "If you want to be a whoosh, wave to your friends, and then I'm going to take you to the pier. I'll carry you home from there. That way we won't have to explain anything to anyone." Eager to please, Amy waved and tried to smile, but she hated being called a whoosh. Damien waved too, and then he turned the board sideways and began swimming for the pier. All along the shore, the waves weren't so big, and Damien skillfully skirted around the crest. The board bobbed up and down, and Amy clung on tightly, trembling all over. When they reached the pier, Damien hooked the string that was tied to his leg to the brass nail, hiked himself up, and then pulled Amy to safety. No one else was nearby, so there were no questions to answer. "Do you want me to carry you home?" he asked, reaching out his arms. Momentarily, he glanced over to the girls who were sitting on the beach. Amy knew Damien wanted to teach his next lesson. The pier was warm in the sunshine. Weakly, she stretched out flat on her stomach. "I'll just lie here in the sun and get dry," she told him. And then she begged, "Can you stay with me just a little longer?" "Vinitha's waiting for a lesson," he replied. "If you're all right, then I should go." Suppressing a sob of disappointment, Amy nodded. "Okay. Just tell everyone that I wanted to lie in the sun on the pier and get dry." "Thanks," Damien said with a tone of relief as he slipped back into the water. He patted her back. "Rest up and I'll see you later. If you get hungry, your lunch is in my hammock." Without another word, Damien pushed off the pier and headed toward the girls on the beach. The warm sunlight gradually helped Amy to stop shaking. Her shorts and t-shirt began to dry. She felt lonely and scared and longed to talk to someone about the mishap, but she had promised Damien that she wouldn't. "I wish he was here holding my hand," she yearned. "It would be so comforting to have a friend right now." Instead, Damien was giving Vinitha her first lesson. She could see them heading out into the water. All alone on the pier, with the roaring waves passing by and too weak to walk home, Amy fearfully remembered the tumultuous events. "I'm so thankful to be still alive," she told herself over and over. "I never want to die, never, and I came so close." Exhausted and soothed by the warm sunshine, Amy fell asleep. Chapter 17. Two Loving Friends. Sloppy wet licks roused Amy from sleep. Pushing the wet nose away and opening her eyes quickly, she saw Fredo lying on the pier beside her. He whined anxiously and tried to lick her face some more. "I'm okay, Fredo," she told him, reaching over to pat his head. Fredo laid his white muzzle on his paws and looked up at her with big, brown, anxious eyes. She heard footsteps on the pier and turned to see Uncle Louis striding toward her. "Amy," he called out anxiously, "are you okay?" "I think so," she murmured, forcing herself to sit up. Fredo crawled forward and put his head on her lap. Uncle Louis sat down and put his arm around her. "Damien told me to check on you," he said with deep concern. "He told me you almost drowned." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh, I'm so glad I can talk to you about it," she exclaimed, happy to be flanked on both sides by loving companions. "Uncle Louis, I almost died," she wailed. "I couldn't breathe for so long. I really thought it was the end. If Damien hadn't pulled me up at that very last moment, I would have lost my breath forever. It was that close." Holding her tightly, Uncle Louis didn't seem to mind that she needed to cry. "That's such a scary experience," he empathized. "I am so sorry it happened to you, Amy. I'm so very thankful you were rescued." After the sobs had subsided and all the horrifying details had spilled out, Amy felt a huge sense of relief. "Uncle Louis," she asked, leaning her head on his shoulder as she stroked the soft ears of the sleeping dog, "I don't want to die, ever. Is there something we can do about it? Can we stop it from happening?" Looking thoughtful, Uncle Louis replied, "Well, we can be careful about our choices so we don't end things earlier than we need to." He shook his head. "But look at me, Amy. I've only lived 63 months, and my hair is white, and I don't have the strength I used to. I don't think we can stop it," he reflected slowly. "But I'm sure the professor will find a way, if there is one. After all, he gave us life, and he is incredibly intelligent. I'm sure he will figure out a way to give us more life." "Does that mean he will figure out how to stop death?" Uncle Louis looked uncertain. "I don't know. Either he'll stop death or he'll find a way to give back life. Apparently he thinks he may be able to restore life to the cells." "He is the mastermind of paradise, right?" Amy murmured. "Yes," Uncle Louis agreed. "He's very, very intelligent. He's always doing experiments and research, and he's even written a complicated book dispelling foolish delusion. I believe he will find a way." Amy wasn't sure what delusions were, but they both heard the dinner bell ringing. "Ready to go eat?" Uncle Louis asked. Amy realized she had missed lunch and slept for most of the afternoon, but she was still tired. "I'm not hungry," she told him. "I'd just like to go home and go to bed." Standing up, Uncle Louis offered his hand. "I'll help you," he said. The copper-haired girl gently woke the sleeping dog, who groaned as she lifted his head off her lap. She took the outstretched hand and rose to her feet. A slim young man was walking on the beach, pushing large branches in his carry cart. "Thanks for looking after that, Zahir," Uncle Louis called out. "I really appreciate your offer." "What is Zahir doing?" Amy asked curiously. "He's going to build a surfboard holder for the beach boys," Uncle Louis told her. "Because he hit Damien?" Amy inquired. "Yes." "I don't understand why he did that," Amy mused, leaning on Uncle Louis as they trudged up the hill. "Zahir is usually so kind." Uncle Louis nodded. It was difficult sometimes for him to keep the confidences of all the tinies in his care and allow them to learn and grow from their own experiences. Looking down at the pathway, he said softly, "Sometimes when people are hurting inside, they hurt others without thinking." "Is Zahir hurting?" Amy questioned, stopping for a rest. "Is he upset that Damien keeps teasing him?" Looking away, Uncle Louis was hesitant to answer, but he was thankful to take a break from climbing the hill. "We don't always know what may be bothering other people," he smiled sadly. "But if we're a good friend, we ask them and find out." Inwardly, Amy told herself that she would talk to Zahir as soon as she saw him on his own, even if he seemed to be avoiding her. She would also encourage Damien to stop calling him names. Together they reached the top of Rainbow Hill with a few more rests along the way. When Amy was alone in her room, she changed into her long white nightshirt, crawled into bed, and fell fast asleep once again. Chapter 18. Future Plans. "Amy nearly drowned today," Louis told the professor on a video call late that night. "She was out with Damien, surfing in the deep water. She's fine now." The look on the professor's face was one of horror. "Sa-a-lors, nearly drowned," he echoed. "How did that happen?" "Apparently, Damien tried to surf on the same board with her and threw her off balance. But he rescued her just in time. I hope she gives up surfing and does something safer." Nodding, Louis assured him. As of today, she has no plans to ever surf again, but that may change once she gets over her fright. There were other practical matters that Louis needed to discuss, and the conversation changed to a list of products needed in the store, a request for another biology book with pictures, and then he had several questions from the chapter he had just read of the professor's book. Louis didn't understand what was meant by the Big Bang, or the difference between impossibility and improbability, or capricious, genocidal, or megalomaniacal. He also wanted to know why the professor would write such a big book against a god that he didn't believe existed. "A lot of false information is passed around in my world," Jax explained. "Sadly, too many are looking for a comforting fable to give them false hopes." Louis spoke up. "But how can any story about God be comforting when he's such a terrible being?" "It is all very confusing," the professor relayed, and then he tried to give Louis a simplified version of the Big Bang. It took a while to get through all the issues and explain the terms. Louis pretended to understand, as he didn't want the professor to think he was a fool. Once they had said good night, Jax looked into the dark dome and saw the beach boys tossing an apple back and forth in the shallow water. Everyone else seemed to be fast asleep in their houses. He thought about the future of paradise. Louis was aging quickly, and he didn't know how much longer his first tiny would last. "If anything happens to Louis," he contemplated, stroking his white goatee, "I want Amy to take over the private communications with me." Pacing back and forth in his office, he thought about how close she had come to drowning. "Sa-a-lors," he exclaimed anxiously. "I can't lose Amy. She's my precious girl. She's a very precious girl. Damien is too wild for her." Mentally, he calculated the ages of his tinies. In 2 more days, it would be March 1st. Louis had been alive for over 63 months, which made him equivalent to a 63-year-old man. The tinies were nearly 17. "They are still too young to be choosing boyfriends and girlfriends," he thought disparagingly. "They don't fully understand what they're looking for yet. But I suppose this is the age when strong attractions occur, as in my world, so in theirs." Considering the future, Jax thought about the plans he had made. "I don't want everything to be on one person's shoulders like it's been for Louis. There needs to be a responsible group managing all the roles together. If Amy is given the role of communication, she will need to do this with a partner, whoever that will be." He sighed deeply. "I don't believe Damien would be a good support for her, unless he changes a great deal, which is still possible, I suppose." Shaking his head, he tried to imagine the scenario. "I just don't feel he would do well with full internet privileges and responsibilities. He might make a fantastic lifeguard once he's settled down and is more mature, but at this point, he isn't looking to serve the needs of others or the betterment of his community. Damien only does what Damien wants to do." With a smile, Jack's dreams for a 3rd generation of tinies carried him away. He could well imagine parents in his world begging to donate genetic material in order for one or more of their children to grow up in paradise. It was such a wonderful, safe environment. He believed there were a good core of tinies that could take on Louis's roles in the future. Zahir and Amy, Kenzie, Santa, Georgia, They would all be knowledgeable, motivational teachers. Tina was excelling in the role of a nurse. He could well imagine all the Beach Boys ensuring that the next generation learned to swim, hopefully, with a little more patience and encouragement. The farmers and storekeepers had the food supply well in hand. Should there be another generation in paradise, he could visualize Georgia reading her beautiful books to the wide-eyed children and telling them all about the history of their world. Laughter rang out over the speakers, and the professor looked in to see Damien and Lima raiding an apple tree while everyone else was asleep. He shook his head in dismay. It was true that the apple trees were so loaded down, it was unlikely the farmers would notice anything missing. But still, he thought, I've only allowed 2 rules in paradise, and one is no stealing. The professor paced back and forth in his office. All along, he'd hoped that Amy would choose the dark-haired young man as her partner for several important reasons, one being only a possibility, but a secret that no one knew except for him. Zahir is the best choice for my girl, he smiled. He'll be an excellent servant leader. Why don't they hang out anymore? I haven't heard them sing together since they re-entered paradise. That was almost 2 months ago. Is he really so smitten with Georgia? For sure, she is beautiful. But I was once certain that he loved Amy. Stopping again to look into the dome, the professor gazed toward the quiet houses on Rainbow Hill. He sighed deeply as he wrestled with his initial decision not to interfere. I'm happy to leave everyone else to their own likes and loves, he thought, but I feel that I must make an exception for Amy. If I want the best outcome for the future of paradise, those who communicate with me must be tinies that I can work with, who respect me, people that I know will want to do the right thing, those who care about my guidance and direction. Jax raised his eyebrows, realizing there was one more important quality. And I need someone who has a genuine concern for others, a true heart of gold. He pondered the matter carefully. Kenzie is quite caring, he considered. Santa looks out for others. Tina is a quiet nurturer. But Zahir purposely reaches out to those who don't deserve his help, except maybe Damien. For whatever reason, those two just don't hit it off. He thought hard. There must be some way to encourage Amy's friendship with Zahir. Stroking his goatee, he considered the matter. What can I send in that they'll both enjoy and want to do together? In a moment, he had an idea. A musical instrument, he thought. Or a kit to make a musical instrument. He clapped his hands together. Très bon, that's it. I'll send in something that takes a lot of time to build. Something really special that will bring them together. I'll tell Louis that all the musicians need to work on it. Maybe it will inspire them to write more of their beautiful songs. I love their songs. Chapter 19. Tears. Evan was concerned when the professor told him about his plan to send in the xylophone kit for Amy and Zahir. But Jax, he reminded him, you said you weren't going to intervene in the relationships between the tinies. Maybe Amy is happiest with Damien. After all, that's who she's been spending most of her time with. I haven't seen her with Zahir for weeks. And besides, Zahir and Georgia are always together. He seems very happy with her. I feel you may be forcing something that's not meant to be. It's not really intervening, the professor argued, having still not disclosed his full plan for Amy and the future of paradise. I'm only sending in a kit to make a xylophone. I'll tell Louis that all the musicians should work on it, not just Zahir and Amy. I just want to be sure we aren't going against our principles, Evan replied. I think we should let them work things out on their own. Regardless of who puts it together, paradise needs a xylophone, the professor stated. Relenting a little, he agreed. Okay, I won't say anything to Louis about it. We'll simply send in the kit and see what happens. It won't be overt interference. Just a gentle nudge in the right direction. It's all part of our experiment, right? Send it in, Evan agreed. But I feel we have already been interfering more than we should. Making a new suggestion, Evan said, I think Louis should be allowed to lead for a while all on his own, without consulting so much with us. He's shown he is adept for the challenge. He's a natural servant. He cares about all the tinies. To be truly empowered, Louis needs to feel that his judgment is trusted and supported by us, even if he occasionally veers from the course we'd like him to take." Nodding reluctantly, the professor agreed. "You keep me on track, Evan," he smiled. "I never realized how hard it is to keep to one's principles when you know the direction you want everyone to take. I don't like to interfere or manipulate, but some things aren't working out the way I'd hoped, and they might endanger the future." "Maybe or maybe not," Evan nodded. "It's easy for us to force our will on theirs, but then we would be taking away their freedom to choose. If there was a real God in this world, you wouldn't want him to force us to follow his direction, would you?" "Non. Forcing people just causes them to resist." Then he stopped abruptly and looked at Evan. "Have you been talking to Seth about free will?" "Not recently, but yes, I have." "I thought so," he grumbled. "Sounds familiar." Later on, as Evan did a Google search for do-it-yourself xylophones, he thought to himself, if there is a God, does he view his creation as a big experiment in which he tries different scenarios to see what works best? Or did he have a plan right from the beginning? It had been weeks since Evan had last talked to Seth. The younger student was taking easier courses this second semester, aside from biotechnology, and hadn't needed any tutoring. Evan had lots of questions of his own, but he wasn't sure Seth was the right one to ask. It took Evan and the professor a few days to gather the xylophone supplies. It was Saturday when the professor finally loaded them on the train. When the whistle blew later that afternoon, Amy was walking from Rainbow Hill to the gardens to collect some vegetables for the dinner salad. She saw the new surfboard holder that Zahir had made positioned quite close to the beach. She liked the way he had used the discarded tree branches to create a natural but creative structure that would hold at least 10 surfboards. "Zahir did a really good job," Amy considered. She sighed. "I still haven't found an opportunity to talk to him, but he seems to be fine with everyone else. Maybe he's just so in love with Georgia that he doesn't notice me anymore," she surmised gloomily. "He might think I was strange if I asked him what was wrong. He'd probably frown and say, 'What are you talking about?' Then I'd feel so dumb for asking." Down by the beach, Vanitha was painting Damien's surfboard. The shy, pretty, dusky girl had taken 2 surfing lessons now, while Amy was afraid to go again. Unimpressed by his first student's fears, Damien had been spending most of his time with his new student. He was showing Vanitha the kind of swirl he wanted on his board, and they were both laughing at his over-exaggerated gestures. As Amy looked on, she realized the charming, friendly interactions the young surfer was sharing with Vanitha were very similar to those he had shared with her. "I claimed him," she reflected with deep hurt. "I thought Damien loved me more than anyone else. That was a big mistake." According to the girls' rule, the claim was not effective if the guy chose to be with someone else. The two waved cheerfully to Amy as she walked by, but a painful feeling squeezed her chest. She didn't really know how to describe the feeling, but it wasn't a feeling that made her want to sing. Instead, she wanted to slink away and cry. Passing by the newly built shop for haircuts, books, and crafts, the pain intensified. Just like the surfboard holder, the new building was fashioned from hand-sawn logs and curvy branches of old trees. Inside the window, several exquisitely painted pots were on display. With a high-pitched meow, Vanitha's slim gray and brown kitten ran up to her and brushed affectionately against her leg. Reaching down to pat the cat, Amy noticed a new sign that hung from the arched doorway. Stylish writing spelled out, "Creative Shop." A hand-painted scissor and paintbrush motif set it off. Amy loved everything about the new place, except for the fact that Zahir and Kenzie had made it for Georgia and Vanitha. Amy was no longer invited to cut hair, as she rarely had a customer. "If only I could find something that I'm good at," she thought wistfully. "Sure, I can cook," she considered, "and everyone eats what I make. They're all happy I'm helping out with breakfast again, but I don't feel excited about cooking. The food comes and it goes. Nothing lasts for more than an hour." Tina waved to her as she approached the farmland. She was tidying up the chicken yard. Santa and Charlie were working in the garden. They had just finished cutting lettuce and spinach and were loading up the carry cart with supplies for dinner. "Where's your smile, Missy?" Santa asked, laughing and patting her on the back. "Do you need me to do a little dance for you?" Swirling around and clapping her green-stained hands together, Santa tried to cheer up her friend. Amy sighed and tried to smile, but it was fake. Santa could tell. Don't give up so easily, Amy, Santa protested. If you love Damien, you have to keep surfing, she laughed, giving her a warm hug. I'm loving my lessons. Lima says in a few weeks I'll be ready to join the show. You could do it with us. You made it out to the big waves. Vanitha is going to do real surfing next week. We could do a 3-girl show. We'd be so good together. Inwardly, Amy told herself, no, just a whoosh. To Santa, she said, it's just not my thing. Holding back tears, she said, if Damien would rather be with someone else, then I take back my claim. What? Santa protested. You're taking back your claim? Yes, Amy nodded. For now, I'd rather help in the kitchen than go surfing. Changing the topic quickly, she asked, do you have any tomatoes or cucumbers yet? Maybe next week, Charlie told her. They are just blossoming. Bojo, Charlie's new puppy, had his nose to the ground, tracking down the rabbits which were always trying to enter the garden. He ran right through Amy's legs and began barking. He's a good one, Charlie said. I hardly need a fence. Amy watched him chase a brown rabbit which quickly ducked down a hole in the orchard. Come on, Bojo, Charlie called out with dismay. You've got to catch him. With a frown, Amy looked over. That rabbit is eating all the carrots, Charlie explained. I don't mind rabbits that stay by the store, but that brown one is damaging the crops. Taking the handles of the full carry cart, which Santa had loaded for her, Amy said a dismal goodbye and carried on towards the store. She wasn't sure what Charlie meant by, you've got to catch him. Would he put him in a cage? Surely he didn't want his dog to harm the little creature. As she walked along the stone pathway which the professor had repositioned with perfect precision, she saw Nancy's cat ripple low to the ground with her eyes fixed on something. 2 of the new kittens were following closely behind and holding the very same pose. Suddenly, the orange cat sprang forward and pounced. There were loud growls and screams, and then to Amy's horror, Ripple turned around with a limp gray rabbit in her mouth. Blood was dripping down from the rabbit's neck. Its long ears hung down in dismal fashion and its eyes were closed. You didn't just kill my rabbit, Amy cried out in terror, recognizing the little gray creature from our evening rendezvous on the hill. But before she could reach Ripple, the striped orange cat dashed off toward the wheat field, carrying her prey. The kittens bounded behind her. Hot tears poured down Amy's cheeks. This is not supposed to happen, she wailed. Will all the rabbits die? Uncle Louis had heard the commotion and came running across the meadow from the store. What happened? He asked, rather out of breath. My little gray rabbit was just killed, Amy wailed. Ripple killed it. Pointing to the wheat field, Amy tearfully told him she took it over there and the kittens followed her. They're going to learn to do what she did. Uncle Louis reached out to Amy and drew her close. Amy sobbed on his shoulder. The strong arms around her made her feel a lot better. It's okay, Uncle Louis told her, patting her hair. I'm surprised this hasn't happened before. Cats and dogs are hunters. They do kill small animals sometimes. Dogs will too? Amy cried out in alarm, thinking of Bojo. Sometimes, Uncle Louis told her. Will all the rabbits die? No, because rabbits are fast and they have holes to hide in, holes that are too small for cats and dogs to get through. After a while, Uncle Louis's kind hug and reassuring words eased the painful feelings. Amy calmed down and felt better. Uncle Louis walked with her as she pushed the cart to the store. He asked what she was making for dinner, but she was too distraught to think about food. How can animals even think of killing each other, she fretted. On the large deck under the overhanging roof, she noticed that Georgia, Vahid, Kenzie, and Zahir were working on a new project. Zahir and Vahid were cutting graduated lengths of a long plastic pipe. Kenzie was sanding small rectangular pieces of wood in various lengths. Georgia was painting the pieces of wood that Kenzie had sanded. What are you making? Amy asked curiously. It's the xylophone, Zahir told her, struggling with the new word. A what? It's a new instrument that will make music, Georgia exulted, as though Amy should already know about this. The one that came in on the train today. With lots of instructions, Kenzie added, pointing to large sheets of paper lying behind them on the deck. Oh, Amy said flatly, wondering why she hadn't been asked to help. Building a musical instrument sounded really fun. "Hey, what happened out there?" Zahir asked Amy. "You sounded really upset." Kenzie piped up, "Is everything okay?" Zahir's blue eyes were compassionate for the first time in a long while. Amy felt like she might start crying again. "Hippo killed a rabbit," she told him, sniffling. "She killed the little gray one with the long floppy ears." The teenagers were aghast. "Killed it?" Georgia repeated in shock. Looking down at the ground, Amy nodded. "I didn't know Rippa was vicious," Vahid frowned. "Uncle Louis says that cats and dogs sometimes kill little animals," Amy whimpered. Her eyes were welling up with tears again. "Even dogs?" Zahir said in surprise. Nodding, Amy knew she had to get away before she started crying all over again. "I need to make dinner," she said, turning to walk toward the entrance of the store. "Don't cry, Amy," Zahir said sympathetically. "I'll train Fredo to never hurt other animals." Amy turned back to manage a tearful smile. She was thankful that Zahir was talking to her again, even if she still didn't understand why he had stopped. Then she went into the store. Rusty ran over to greet her, and Amy buried her face in his fur. Nancy wanted to know what had happened, and the story had to be told all over again. The storekeeper was shocked that her beloved cat would hurt anything. "Oh no," she said as she pulled lettuce out of the cart to wash for the salad. "I've adopted all the new rabbits and feed them here at the store." Milan opened the small refrigerator to get the leftover fish fillets that Amy hadn't used for breakfast that morning. They were so glad to have her back helping with both meals. Milan was making a chowder. Fish chowder was a favorite among the tinies. Fretting, Nancy asked, "How do I teach Ripple that killing is wrong?" Neither girl knew the answer to that question. Cats seemed much harder to train than the eager-to-please, golden-haired dogs that would do anything for their masters. Chapter 20. The Curse and the Remedy. "No tables left in the Arctic biome" was the text. "Gone to the rainforest." Evan swung around and walked back through the leafless trees in the Canadian deciduous forest. Everything was covered in snow. It was early March, almost spring, but winter had hit hard that week, dropping 20 centimeters of snow overnight. In the morning, when he'd arrived, the maintenance workers were still shoveling the sidewalk so that all the students and scientists could get around. Inside the large, warm, glass-walled structure of the rainforest biome, Evan found Seth McGeorge sitting at one of the round tables in the library resource center. A few other students were studying nearby. Midterms were over, and Seth had not done well in biotechnology. He knew he needed help. "What's going on today in the Arctic biome?" Evan asked as he joined Seth at the table. A sudden racket made it impossible to hear Seth's answer. The howler monkeys in the exhibit just around the corner were making loud, whooping barks. "They are using the Arctic biome for a science convention of some sort," Seth repeated with a smile, when the noise died down. "The librarian told me it has to do with Arctic sea ice." "Likely the fact that it's melting so fast," Evan nodded. "I wonder what they plan to do about it," Seth mused. "Well, I suppose they'll put it down to increase CO2 emissions. No doubt if we can curb all the pollution that humans generate, the planet will be much healthier and generations to come will be able to survive." "I agree with Professor Lemans that we need to be much better stewards of the planet," Seth stated. "We need to do our part and treat God's world with care. But ultimately, I believe only God can reverse the curse that he put on the earth and fix the damage that humans have caused." "He cursed us?" Evan retorted. "What, like some evil wizard?" The howler monkeys started up again, and the two students looked at one another and laughed. The Arctic biome had been a much quieter place to meet. "No, not an evil wizard," Seth smiled when the monkeys had quieted down. "Like a parent, handing out consequences when their rules are disobeyed. I'll show you." Picking up his phone, Seth chose Genesis chapter 3 on his Bible app. Among the reoccurring monkey calls and occasional squawk of a bird, he said, "God made this world a beautiful place, a perfect paradise. He put the first people he created in an amazing garden full of edible fruit, plenty of water to drink, and lots of wildlife to enjoy. But God gave them one rule. He told them they were not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and if they chose to eat from it, they would surely die." "Just one rule?" Evan clarified, as the macaws called out to each other again. They weren't as noisy as the monkeys. I thought the Bible was full of rules. In the beginning, when life was simple and very good, there was only one rule, Seth replied. Sounds easy enough, Evan nodded. It was, Seth agreed. The garden was full of trees that Adam and Eve could eat from. They weren't starving. I take it that they didn't obey the rule, Evan inquired. Seth shook his head, ignoring the raucous bird calls. Eve was deceived by a crafty serpent with the ability to talk, he said. The serpent insinuated that God was lying to her about the consequences of disobedience, and that he was actually trying to keep her from becoming as wise as him. She chose to believe the words of a crafty serpent created by God, rather than the trustworthy Creator himself. What about Adam? Evan asked, as the monkeys began to chatter. My, this is a noisy place, he remarked, glancing down at his watch, but I suppose it is feeding time. Seth smiled, and then he pointed to the passage on his phone. Adam ate from the tree as well, he said. He wanted to be with his wife, so he chose to listen to her rather than the Creator. They both chose to listen to someone else and disobey God. Evan nodded. In his mind, he thought about the tinies in paradise. He could well imagine Odin would be right beside the serpent, encouraging all the others to distrust the professor. He could see Franz and Ponzi lining up behind him, and maybe even convincing Damien and Lema to join. Lily would be running over. Suddenly, he realized Seth was looking at him oddly, waiting for a response. Oh, right, Evan said, giving his head a shake. So they disobeyed the one and only rule they were given, and that's why there was a consequence? Seth scrolled down on his phone and asked Evan to read verse 17 to 19. Looking at the verses, Evan read out loud. And to Adam he said, Because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. With a low whistle, Evan remarked, That sounds pretty harsh, don't you think? Like he only disobeyed one rule, and the whole of creation is cursed? But God warned them beforehand that disobeying the rule would result in death, Seth pointed out. From this point on, they became dying creatures. Disobeying God led to their eyes being opened to good and evil, which has plagued us all ever since. However, it has also given us the opportunity to see the contrast and value goodness. Once human nature was inclined to evil, God had to add rules as society deteriorated. With a rueful smile, Seth added, So many people think that rules are given to make their lives miserable, and this may be true of some man-made rules, but God gave rules to keep us from hurting ourselves or each other. As people became more unloving, selfish, and unhygienic, God had to add more and more commands to temper things like disease, slavery, rape, multiple wives, and divorce, things that were not part of the Garden of Eden. The rules were given to save life, not destroy it. Good rules create an orderly society which makes life better for everyone. But if you disobey, you die, Evan prodded with a frown. When we choose to go against God's commands, however big or small we may think our actions are, God calls it sin, Seth replied. God clearly tells us the consequence of sin is death. If someone chooses to despise the law of gravity, no one argues that death is an unfair consequence. Evan was nodding. He thought about watching the tinies play their pointless game without rules. He thought over the rules he wished he could enforce in paradise, hand-washing and attending school, and the two that the professor had reluctantly agreed upon. He knew they were all for the same good purpose, wanting to help the tinies and save them from foolish actions and harmful consequences. But I miss telling you the good news, Seth said with a smile. Oh, Evan laughed. There is good news? The best news ever, Seth relayed. He read out God's curse on the serpent and told him that in those few verses, there was a promise that God was going to bring a savior who would crush the serpent's head and bring an end to the painful curse that sin had inflicted on the world. Evan looked up with interest. So, did God know what would happen from the very beginning, he asked? Or was the world just a big experiment that went wrong? Seth smiled. God clearly knew that allowing humans free will would lead to sin and death, he acknowledged. If you are free to do what's right, then you are also free to do what's wrong. It was only going to be a matter of time before someone disobeyed. But God had a plan to account for human failure. We read in Revelation, I believe it's chapter 13, that Jesus' death on the cross was already in God's mind before the foundation of the world. Throughout the Old Testament, there are many promises of a Savior who would give his life to bring salvation to everyone. Sitting back in his chair, Evan pondered the new thoughts. He was pleased that the world wasn't a big experiment gone wrong, and that God wasn't trying various things on a whim to see what worked best. If he knows what will happen, does he force it to happen? Evan asked. He may use circumstances to encourage us to do his will, Seth replied. It's hard for us to understand God's supernatural ability to foresee the future. He paused, searching for a helpful analogy, and then explained, even on a very small scale, you know that if you fail to show up for tutoring when you've promised me that you'll be there, I will be upset. You don't force me to be upset. You just know that it will happen. Evan nodded. Reflecting on all that they had discussed, he clarified, so we all die because of sin. Yes. And then what? What is the hope or this salvation that you refer to? Can God give us life again? Seth nodded with excitement. Yes, he can. He made the first man from dust and breathed into him his life-giving spirit. The dust body plus God's spirit power created a living soul, or living creature, as the Hebrew word nephesh is often translated. When we die, Ecclesiastes 12 says, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. But God can give the spirit back to energize our bodies again. Is there any proof? Yes, numerous times in the Bible people were resurrected, which means they were made alive again after dying. But I'd have to believe the Bible was true to believe this actually happened, Evan pointed out. Yes, Seth acknowledged. Although the most important resurrection was Jesus Christ, and there is secular historical evidence that this truly happened, Jesus was the first human being to be brought back from death and given immortality. This is the assurance God has given to all mankind. He will do the same for us. Immortality, Evan pondered. What do you mean by immortality? It means being energized by God's Spirit to live forever. Picking up his phone, Seth pressed his Bible app. He found 1 Corinthians 15 and showed Evan several verses in the chapter, demonstrating the vital importance of resurrection to the gospel message and showing him that Jesus was the first human being to ever experience this radical change of nature. Jesus is, Seth pointed out, the first fruits, or the first harvest, he explained, of those who have fallen asleep. Scrolling through the passage, Seth showed Evan the promise. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall all be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. Death is no more, Evan repeated, reading the whole passage. Well, that would be amazing if true. Death is the one enemy we can't overcome. He thought about the Tiny's request that the professor remake Rosa and pondered inwardly. God says he made man from the basic elements. Maybe the reason science can't find a way to initiate or restore life is because it's a supernatural gift that only God can give. If God truly made us the first time, that would prove he has the power to do it again. And what a great promise if, in fact, God will remake us far better than we are now. Should we start reviewing for the test tomorrow? Seth asked suddenly, seeing the time on his phone. With a start, Evan sat up in his chair. They had talked for over an hour. Just one more question, he begged. Seth smiled. What evidence do we have that Jesus was resurrected? Can we know for sure? You'll find lots about this online, Seth assured him. There are a few things to consider. Jesus' life was so impactful that the Gregorian calendar begins from his birth. Who else in history has changed the whole dating system? There are historical documents outside of the Bible that refer to Jesus being raised from the dead. His followers believed so passionately that he had been raised that they endured terrible persecution and physical harm, gave up homes, families, comforts, and even refused to recant on the pain of death so that they could pass on this message to the rest of the world. Who would suffer all that for a lie? Jesus' resurrection has been celebrated by millions ever since, every year. Something very powerful took place 2,000 years ago that impacted the world in a major way. Evan nodded thoughtfully, determined to look deeper into the subject when he got home. "Okay," he grinned, turning the page in the textbook. "Look, Seth," he said, "fair is fair. You just tutored me for an hour, so this hour is free for you. Maybe we can do the same next week. I have so many questions." Suddenly, a former roommate of Evan's came around the corner carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of goodies. "Hey, I heard you were in here," he said. "Sorry, Jim, I'm just tutoring someone right now. Can we meet afterward?" "I brought you some coffee," Jim said, "and it's hot now, but it won't be later. Look, I just want to ask you quickly about something." Evan looked over at Seth. "Do you mind? Are you tight for time?" Seth shook his head. "Don't worry about me. I'll just keep working on my assignment while you talk." "What is it, Jim?" Evan asked. "Well, I've been hearing some strange rumors around town," Jim began. "You and the professor have been buying some very odd items that don't really fit with the biomes you have here in Greenville." "Such as?" "Well, all kinds of fairy furniture, like $300 worth, and fairy petal clothing, enough to dress 100 fairies. And apparently you recently purchased about 8 model log homes. What's with all this stuff, man? I don't see it around here anywhere." Evasively, Evan asked, "Well, what do you think it's for?" "That's what I'm asking you," Jim said impatiently. "What on earth are you working on?" "The new display will be revealed next month," Evan told him. "Until then, I'm not at liberty to say anything." "Oh, come on," Jim prodded. "No, it's not my project," Evan told him firmly. "You'll have to restrain your curiosity till April." "Everyone's wondering what's going on," Jim warned. "That's great," Evan smiled. "Then there'll be a good turnout for the new display when it opens." "Some friend," Jim said with a shake of his head. With the coffee cup still in the tray he held, he turned to leave. However, in a moment he was back. "Sorry," he chuckled. "I'll still give you the coffee and donuts, even if you won't tell me anything." Evan accepted the refreshment gratefully. "April will be here before you know it," he said. "And thanks a lot for the coffee and treats." When Jim left, Evan glanced over at Seth and passed him a donut. The red-haired student was looking at him in a peculiar sort of way. His green eyes were filled with intrigue. With the first hour already gone, Evan and Seth got down to business. Seth didn't ask any questions about the things Jim had said, but Evan was well aware that the young man had heard enough details to trigger deep curiosity.